One thing that I sort of hate about the scientific community is how they're not really friendly towards spreading their information to the common public. In scientific papers, concepts are explained in quite some complicated manners, and no one really takes the effort to translate this to people who are interested in science but are just not as qualified or knowledgeable. Of course, there are some news articles that do this, but they often get the information wrong or cherry pick only the interesting experiments and whatnot. Since the scientific community, in my opinion, remains quite secluded from the rest of the world, it's difficult for many people to know what progress there is in science. And this general public includes me too. I'm not an expert on every scientific topic, and I have difficulties reading papers too, especially when they use nasty terminologies that throw you off. But anyway, let's talk about cancer. If I asked you to name a recent treatment that has come up in the last few years, would you be able to do so? Many of you probably wouldn't know, and I blame this on how secluded the scientific community really is, and it's not their fault either. Anyway, there's a difference between just simply not knowing what progress there has been made in cancer, and actively claiming that there is no progress. Many alternative medicine proponents would claim the latter.
So the war on cancer started officially, I guess, some 50 years ago. People have been raising money for the cure for probably much longer than that.
See, there's most likely not going to be just a cure for cancer, because cancer isn't just one disease. There are over 100 different types of cancer, and each of these would behave differently for different patients. Like I mentioned in a previous video, two people with the same cancer type will react differently to different treatments. Heck, even the individual tumor cells will act differently to different treatments. So in reality, we are not going to be looking for one particular cure. Rather, it is the development of multiple treatments and drugs that will strive us closer to beating cancer.
Has there been any progress?
Yes. Let's take a look at one very clear example. In 1971, Dr. Falkman became famous for his work in angiogenesis, which means the formation of blood vessels. At the time, the idea was criticized heavily by mainstream science. Essentially, what he found was that tumors were manipulating the host environment and creating blood vessels that extend into their local area. This ultimately feeds the tumors and can serve as the first step to metastasis. Following the discovery, statin drugs were found and developed that inhibited blood vessel formation as a means to combat cancer. Falkman's work was a huge revolution to the study of cancer. That is just one example of progress.
No, as you probably know.
Right.
See, I don't know if this is just a regular non-science person who is simply just unaware of what's going on in the scientific world, or if this is a conspiracy against modern medicine. I wouldn't blame people for not knowing recent discoveries in science, but being part of the alternative medicine conspiracy theory is just not acceptable.
The Cancer Society, they've been at it over 80 years. They've spent billions and billions of dollars looking for the cure.
Just a side point here, although scientists are getting billions of dollars per year for cancer research, we could always use more, especially for a disease that affects every 1 in 2 men and every 1 in 3 women. And with Trump as president, we're going in the opposite direction. He wants to cut cancer research funding by $1 billion or something.
They won't admit that there are cures.
It's funny, if the cure for cancer was already known but is just being hidden, why spend all that money for cancer research? Seems like a lot of money to waste just to be pretending to find a cure.
That there are natural cures.
You know what we call alternative medicine that actually works? Medicine.
And so they'll go after allopathic doctors, naturopathic doctors, trying to destroy them, the whole cancer industry.
Actually, the vast majority of scientists and doctors don't care that much about alternative medicine. In their community, it is already accepted that those are bullshit. Anyone who is quote-unquote attacking naturopathic doctors are people like me who care, or the FDA, or any other organization that makes sure that the treatments given to patients actually have evidence to back them up. If we let alternative medicine loose, patients will easily fall into their traps and use it as a replacement to modern medicine. The last thing we want is people dying because of false information being propagated on the internet.
And they're all in partnership with each other.
The only partnership I can think of is scientists sharing their findings with each other and other scientists taking their work as a ladder to discover more.
And no, of course not. They're not going to admit to a cure. They still do the same 3 things they've been doing since the 1930s.
Well, that's because there isn't ever going to be a single cure for the copious number of cancer diseases. If you were a scientist who has any background on cancer, you'd probably know this.
surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation.
Well, if that's the only 3 types of treatment you know, then I'm sorry you haven't been keeping up with anything. First of all, chemotherapy itself is a combination of drugs. We will change the type of drug administered after diagnosing the patient and discovering what type of tumors they have. This in itself is variation, and new drugs are being added very often. Second, treatment of cancer these days have become more and more personalized, meaning we will select a specific treatment for each specific patient depending on the disease. We don't only use these 3 methods anymore. Third, I can name a bunch of cancer treatments that isn't chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery. For example, immunotherapy, including vaccinations, toxic sugars, gene editing, etc., etc. The point is there are plenty of different treatments other than the 3 you mentioned, so it's time to stop doing interviews like this and instead opening up a scientific paper on your laptop.
And then, every once in a while, like they did 3 days ago in the LA Times, they announced breakthrough with cancer. Cancer treatment. I don't know if you saw it. But I thought, oh yeah, October's coming. That's when they have to announce a breakthrough or 2. So people can think, oh, okay, they're making progress after all these many gajillion years.
I don't particularly like it when a huge article or a video comes out saying, scientific breakthrough, new research on cancer may change the way we treat cancer. No, don't read science popularizers. These often cherry pick or exaggerate a lot of the science. I mean, you can, but just don't expect to get the full picture. This isn't a fault of the scientific community, though. Read the primary sources instead. Trust me, they're worth it.
And we should donate. Good going. I don't know how they think that their $10 or $20 added on to the billions that they've already spent is going to do any good.
Well, we've made a lot of progress since the beginning of cancer research, and it's not just your $10 or $20, it's the combined efforts of everyone and the total that it adds up to that matters.
And then, of course, their biomedical research to look for cures is animal experimentation. People don't know that.
Actually, I think plenty of people know that. And yes, we do work with animals quite often, but that's because we need to show that the new treatment has at least some basis of working before we send it off to clinical trial. What, you want us to directly test them on human patients without knowing its full side effects, or if it's even effective? In that case, would you like to volunteer? We'll start by injecting you with cancer stem cells and wait a bit for them to grow. Then we'll euthanize you and cut out the tumor to examine it. Is that what you want? You want this to be done on humans? Good, we'll stick to mice then.
So they torture animals in their laboratories, knowing they can't extrapolate any of those experiments on animals to people.
Wrong and wrong. These days there are strict guidelines as to how lab animals should be treated. Sure, it may not be the most comfortable life, but we do everything we can to make the animals feel better. Second, we can't extrapolate the information obtained from animals to humans, because the animals we use are evolutionarily similar to us. Gosh, you sound like an extreme animal activist at this point. Now, of course the ethics of this can be debated, but I'm going to be on the side of scientific progress, thank you.
Because of differences in physiology, metabolism, genetics, biochemistry, environment, it's not science.
Well, those are very general. If you want to go into more detail, I'd definitely like to hear them. Anyway, that's it for this video. I'll see you next week.